Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Kovacs here. Welcome to our third day of Bava Batra in the Mishnah Yomi. We're in chapter 1, Mishnayot Hey and Vav, 5 and 6 today. I will also try to pre-record the shir for tomorrow for Shabbat Kodesh in advance. Bli Neder should go live shortly after midnight Eastern Standard Time, after 7 a.m. Israel time. We're in Mishnah Hey. Kofin Oto. We compel him, meaning a resident of a shared courtyard, livnot beit shar, to contribute to building the gatehouse, v'delet lachatzer, and also the door to the courtyard. So everyone who lives in the courtyard has to contribute towards these fixtures that everyone uses. The gatehouse is sort of a way to keep people out who might push their way into the courtyard, and of course the door to open up into their shared courtyard. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, he adds, Lo kol hachatzerot ru'uyot lebeit shar. He says, really not every courtyard needs to have a gatehouse, to have this additional structure in the wall to sort of keep people out a little bit so people don't sort of push their way in. Really, if the chatzer is right next to the Reshut Rabbim, it's very busy, and sometimes there's overflow from that busy street into their courtyard, then it would be appropriate to build such a thing. But if not, you can't really compel the residents to contribute towards that. The Mishnah adds, what about residents of the city? Kofin oto. You can force a resident of the city, livnot la'ir, to build for the city, choma, the wall, dilatayim, the double doors, the big doors like we see at the entrance to the old city of Riach, and the beam to lock the doors. These are public needs. Everyone in the city is expected to contribute. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, he adds, lo kol arayot arayot l'chama. He says, really not every city needs a wall. The ones near the border probably need a wall. And the Mishnah adds, Kama yehei be'ir, how long does he have to be in that city? V'hei k'anshei ir. And he's just like the other residents of the city in that he has to contribute towards these items, and pay taxes and donate towards Hatzalah and all of the public needs. Shnei Masar Chodesh. If he's there for 12 years, then he has to be contributing towards all of these city-wide needs. Kona ba beit dira, if he buys a house, Harehu ka'anshei ir miyad. Then he immediately becomes a resident of the city and compelled to contribute towards the city's needs. Now, Mishnah Vav is going to take us back to the subject of Mishnah Aleph, the very first Mishnah where there were two partners who shared a courtyard, a chatzer, together, and they wanted to divide it. Now, Mishnah Vav adds a detail. Ein cholkin et chatzer. We don't actually divide a shared courtyard. Ajihei arba amot lezeh v'arba amot lezeh. Until each partner gets 4 amot of use in their chatzer. And in the Gemara, they explain, really, it's 8, at least 8, because they get 4 amot in front of their door, of each door, and also an additional 4 amot of space in the chatzer. Of course, they're doing cooking out there with the ovens, doing laundry out there. It's a space you really need to function in that society. V'lo et sadeh, the Mishnah adds, you can't split up a field owned by partners, ajihei ba tisha kabin lezeh, v'tisha kabin lezeh, until each one will get 90 kav area of field left over after they split. It's about 3,750 square amot. So it's a pretty sizable chunk of field. Rabbi Yehuda adds, ajihei ba tisha chatzoi kabin lezeh, v'tisha chatzoi kabin lezeh. He says each one needs to have half as much. It's interesting, in the Gemara, they explain Rabbi Yehuda doesn't actually disagree, but where he lived, the fields were very rich, and you could get by. It was still a significant field to have half as much land because it was very productive, the particular land where Rabbi Yehuda lived. V'lo et agina, and partners who have a garden together, they can't divide this garden. Ajihei ba chatzi kav lezeh v'chatzi kav lezeh. So each of them has a half of a kav area of a garden. Obviously, a garden can be much smaller than a field. Rabbi Kiva Omer Beit Rov. Rabbi Kiva says it could be even half of that size for each. V'lo et truckling, they can't divide up a large fancy building like a mansion. V'lo et hamoran, or a drying room. V'lo et shovach, a dovecoat. V'lo et talit, not a garment. V'lo et merchatz, or a bathhouse. V'lo et beit habad, and not a press like an olive press. Ajihei bahen kedei lezeh, until there's really enough that both of them could use it. And the Mishnah notes, Zeh HaKlal, this is the general rule, Kol she'achalek shmolav chalkin. You could divide the equipment, this facility, and it would still be called the same name. You could divide it. So if it's like a big dance hall, and you divided it in half and put a wall down the middle, well, if it's still called a dance hall, they'd be able to do that. But if not, then they would not be able to do that. V'im lav, if not, ein cholkin, they should not divide it. Ein matai, when does this rule apply? Bizman she'ein shneihim rotzin, when both of them don't agree to the division. This is when one partner is seeking to divide. He is allowed to divide if there's enough for both of them. Aval bizman sheshneim rotzin, but if both of the partners agree, afil b'pachot mechan, that even if there's less than these amounts left over, yachloku, they could go ahead and divide because they're both agreeing to it. V'kitvei kodesh, and sacred writings, sfarim, scrolls. Afal pi sheshneim rotzim lo yachloku, even though they both agree, they might have a Tanakh together as partners, and they agree, they start cutting off the Tanakh, say, okay, you get the Mishlei, I'll get the Esther, it's a little, well, those would be separate scrolls perhaps, but they say, you get the early Nevi'im, I'll get the Malachim, it's not respectful necessarily for the holy writings and our holy books to be taking scissors to them when people want to split them up. And the Rav Bar Nur points out here in the Peirush, he says, this is when they're all in one sefer. We wouldn't take a knife to the scroll and start cutting it up. But if they're separate sfarim, they're separate scrolls rolled separately, then of course partners who share a library or a base medrash together would be allowed to certainly divide the sfarim, as long as there's no disrespect done to the Kisvei Kodesh. Tiskul mitzvot, Shabbat Shalom.